Hi there. Welcome back to Respectfully, You're the Problem. Today's episode is probably going to make you uncomfortable, but that's kind of the entire point of this podcast. And before we dig into it, I want to say how grateful I am that you are here. And if you like this content, please like and leave a review. Share with your friends. Just do so with caution because you'll probably offend them. Please feel free to leave a comment and suggest any topics you'd like to hear or any questions you have. Now, let's get into the shit nobody wants to talk about. Today, I want to talk about shame. Pause for groaning, but hang with me. Shame. So fun. So light. Very casual. Definitely the kind of thing you want to listen to while folding laundry and questioning every relationship you've ever had. But specifically, I want to talk about the way we use shame to try to change behavior. Because there is this idea from Brené Brown that stuck in my head. Side note, if you have not read any of Brené Brown's books or heard any of her content, do so immediately. She's incredible. Now, the idea is this: you cannot shame someone into positive behavior. And the more I thought about that, the more I realized how often we fucking try to. But before I start talking about the way we do this to other people, I, of course, am going to turn that mirror around and let you see your pretty little face. Most of us already know shame doesn't work. We've been trying it on ourselves for years. You make a mistake, you react badly, you send the paragraph. You know the paragraph I'm talking about. 14 paragraphs, 3 screenshots, a timeline, a supporting document, exhibits A through G. You have built a federal case against this man because he said, okay, instead of, okay, babe. And then 2 hours later, your nervous system finally calms down. You reread everything and you're like, oh, that was a lot. So naturally, you decide to respond to your emotional dysregulation in the healthiest way possible by emotionally beating the absolute fucking shit out of yourself. I'm crazy. I'm embarrassing. No wonder nobody wants me. I ruin everything. I always do this. And then you make yourself a promise. I'm never doing that again. I'm going to be calm. I'm going to be healed. I'm going to communicate. I'm basically a licensed therapist now. And then 3 weeks later, trigger, reaction, shame, promise. Trigger, reaction, shame, promise. And eventually you're sitting there saying, I know better. Why the fuck do I keep doing this? Because shame didn't teach you a new behavior. It just taught you to hate yourself after the old one. That's it. You never learned what to do when you felt abandoned. You never learned how to ask for reassurance. You never learned how to regulate yourself before responding. You never learned how to say, hey, I'm feeling insecure right now and I need some reassurance. Which, by the way, sounds absolutely horrifying when you've spent your entire life pretending you don't need anybody. Personally, I'd rather light myself on fire than tell somebody I need reassurance. But we're working on it. That's why we're here. The point is, shame doesn't teach, it punishes. And punishment might stop behavior temporarily, especially if you're afraid enough. But it doesn't necessarily create understanding. It does not create emotional safety. And it doesn't, definitely doesn't, create the tools required to behave differently next time. So, if shame doesn't work on you, why the fuck do you think it's going to work on somebody you love? Because we do this constantly in relationships. We see a behavior we don't like, a behavior that hurts us, a behavior that triggers us. And instead of addressing the behavior, we attack the person. You're selfish. You don't care about me. You're emotionally unavailable. You're immature. You're a terrible communicator. You never think about anyone but yourself. You're just like my ex. And then we wait for change. Like we have somehow created the perfect environment for personal growth. What the fuck is the strategy here? I'm going to make you feel so fucking horrible about yourself that eventually you become the emotionally healthy partner of my dreams. Right. Very innovative. How's that going? Because here's what happens when you shame somebody. They stop listening to the problem and they start defending their character. If I say, you're selfish, you are thinking about the moment I felt unsupported. You're thinking, I'm not fucking selfish. Now you're pulling out receipts. What about Tuesday when I picked up dinner? What about when I helped you move? What about the time and now I'm getting even more angry because I'm thinking, why aren't you listening to me? And you're thinking, why are you attacking me? And suddenly, we are having two completely different conversations. I'm trying to explain that I felt hurt. You're trying to prove that you're not a shitty person. And neither of us is actually talking about the behavior anymore. Court is in session. I am the prosecutor. You're the defense attorney. We both have cases to present. Nobody's having sex tonight. Fantastic. But imagine instead if I said, when I was having a really hard day and you didn't check in on me, I felt alone. Emotional support is really important to me, and I need more of that in this relationship. Now, you might not still like hearing it, but accountability isn't supposed to feel like a spa treatment. But I'm giving you something you can actually respond to, a behavior, an impact, a need. You didn't check in. I felt alone. I need more emotional support. That's the conversation. You're selfish is a verdict. And this is where I think we confuse accountability with shame. So, for example, accountability says, this behavior hurt me. Shame says, you are a person who hurts me. Accountability says, I need more communication. Shame says, you're a terrible communicator. Accountability says, I felt dismissed when you walked away. Shame says, you don't give a shit about my feelings. Do you hear the difference? Because one addresses what someone did, and the other tells them who they are. And listen, sometimes people do shitty things. Sometimes people are repeatedly selfish. Sometimes people are emotionally unavailable. And sometimes people really are just terrible communicators. I'm not saying we need to walk around sprinkling emotional glitter over every asshole we date. It's okay, sweet angel. Your inability to communicate is just part of your journey. No, absolutely not. This is still, respectfully, you're the problem. We believe in accountability here. But if your actual goal is to improve the relationship, you need to ask yourself whether the way you're communicating is creating space for improvement or whether you're just making the other person feel small. And I've had to think about this in my own relationships because I think sometimes we tell ourselves, well, I'm just being honest. Are you? Or are you angry and trying to make sure they feel as bad as you do? Those are different things. And listen, I've done it. I've been hurt and thought, no, you don't understand how badly that hurt me. So I'm going to explain it to you again, louder, with more words, and possibly a PowerPoint presentation. And when that still doesn't feel like enough, you start attacking the person. Because somewhere in your brain, you believe, if I can make them feel ashamed enough, maybe they'll finally understand how much they hurt me. That's the part nobody wants to admit. Most of the time, shaming your partner isn't actually about changing their behavior. It's about punishment. We want them to hurt because we hurt. And I'm not saying that makes you evil, that makes you human. But respectfully, we need to call it what it is. Because saying, I just want him to understand, when what you really mean is, I want him to feel like absolute shit so he never does this to me again. Those are not the same goal. And fear can absolutely change behavior. Shame can absolutely change behavior for a while. Someone might stop doing something because they don't want to be yelled at. They might start checking in more because they're afraid of another argument. They might apologize faster because they know if they don't, they're going to hear about it for 3 days and the next time you have a different argument. They might become extremely careful with their words. And you'll sit there and think, see, it worked. He changed. But did he? Or did he learn how to avoid your reactions? Because those are very different things. Compliance is not connection. Let me say that again for the people in the back. Compliance is not connection. Someone behaving differently because they understand your needs and care about your emotional safety is not the same as somebody behaving differently because they're afraid of what happens if they don't. And this is where relationships can become emotionally exhausting without either person realizing why. One person is constantly monitoring the other. Did he text enough? Did she respond correctly? Did he use the right tone? Did she apologize the right way? And the other person's walking on eggshells. Did I say that wrong? Is she going to be mad at me? Should I bring this up? Is this going to turn into another 3-hour argument? And slowly, nobody feels safe anymore. One person feels chronically disappointed, and the other feels chronically criticized. And both people feel completely misunderstood. That's the shitty part, because underneath it all, both people want connection. One person is screaming, "Please love me better." And the other person is screaming, "Please stop making me feel like I'm failing you." But neither one is actually saying. Instead, it's, "You never care, and nothing I do is ever good enough for you." Is this sounding familiar to anyone else? And now you're fighting about the fight you had the original fight about. It's the sequel nobody asked for. And here's where vulnerability comes in. Because saying you're selfish feels stronger than saying I needed you and I felt alone. Saying you don't care about me feels stronger than saying I'm scared that I'm not important to you. Saying you're emotionally unavailable feels stronger than saying I feel disconnected from you and I don't know how to reach you. Anger feels powerful. Criticism feels protective. Vulnerability feels like standing emotionally naked in fluorescent lighting. Nobody nobody wants that. But criticism doesn't create the connection you're asking for. Usually it creates defense. And then you take their defensiveness as proof that they don't care. So you criticize harder and they defend harder. And congratulations, we've created a toxic fucking cycle. You feel hurt, you feel criticized, they feel ashamed, they defend or withdraw, you feel abandoned, you criticize harder, they withdraw further. And eventually, both people are saying, we can't communicate. No shit. One person is attacking, and the other person is wearing emotional body armor. Of course, nobody can communicate. I want to be very clear here. Communicating without shame does not mean removing consequences. It doesn't mean tolerating the same behavior. You can communicate beautifully, and someone can still choose not to change. You can say, this behavior hurt me. You can explain the impact. You can clearly communicate what you need, and they might still decide, I don't want to do that, or I can't give you that. And then you have information. That's when boundaries come in. And I think this is another place where we get confused. A boundary is not, you need to change. A boundary is, if this continues, I have to decide what I'm going to do. You cannot control somebody into becoming your ideal partner. You cannot shame somebody into becoming emotionally available. You cannot criticize someone into becoming affectionate. You cannot humiliate someone into vulnerability. And you can't keep screaming, communicate with me, at someone who has learned that every time they communicate with you, their words are going to be analyzed like a fucking zodiac sign. At some point, you have to create the kind of environment you're asking them to show up in. Again, That doesn't mean their behavior is your responsibility. Their growth is theirs. That is not your job. But the emotional environment you can help create in the relationship, that you can contribute to. That is your part to play. And, well, sometimes, respectfully, you're the problem. Maybe you're asking someone to communicate while punishing them every time they're honest because it's not the response that you decided would be acceptable. Maybe you're asking someone to be vulnerable while using their vulnerabilities against them in arguments. Maybe you're asking someone to open up while correcting the way they open up. Maybe you're asking someone to love you better while constantly reminding them of every way they've loved you wrong. That shit is exhausting. Imagine going to work every day and your boss only talks to you when you fuck up, never acknowledges your improvement, never acknowledges your effort, never says, "Hey, I noticed you handled that differently." All it is just, "You did this wrong. You forgot this. You should have known. You always do this. You would hate that fucking job." And yet, some of us are running our relationships like the world's worst performance review. And then we're confused why our partner seems emotionally checked out. People grow where growth feels possible. And shame makes people feel like the verdict has already been decided. If you constantly tell someone you're selfish, eventually they may believe that nothing I do will convince you I'm not selfish. If you're constantly saying you don't care about me, well, eventually they're going to think you've decided I don't care. So what's the point in trying to convince you otherwise? If you're repeatedly reminding your partner, you always do this, why would they believe you're going to notice when they don't? This is something I think we need to talk about more. If you want someone to change, you also have to allow them to be different. You cannot keep dragging the old versions of them into every new situation. And again, honey, let's not forget to first turn that mirror around and analyze your own shitty behavior before you try to change someone else's. Respectfully. If someone has taken a genuine effort to take accountability, if they're making changes, if they're showing up differently, at some point, you have to decide whether you're willing to see it. Because sometimes we get so attached to the story. He doesn't care. She's selfish. He's emotionally unavailable. That even when the behavior changes, we keep looking for evidence that our story is still true. And that is not fair. You cannot demand growth from someone and then refuse to acknowledge their efforts and refuse to consider how your shitty controlling behavior might be impacting them. Wild concept, I know. That's crazy. Now, if they're not changing, okay, that's different. If you've communicated the behavior, explained the impact, clearly expressed your needs, and nothing changes, your job is not to become better at shaming them. Your job is to decide whether this relationship works for you. And that is the hardest part because sometimes criticism is our way of avoiding making a decision. We keep trying to change somebody because we don't want to accept that they may not be capable of giving us what we need. So we explain and explain and explain, and we yell and we cry and we shame and we threaten and we send another paragraph. Because maybe if I say it the right way, maybe I can make him understand. Maybe if I waterboard him enough with all of my feelings, he'll become the person that I need. Maybe. Probably fucking not. And you need to know the difference between someone who is struggling to change and someone who has no intention of changing. One needs patience and accountability. The other needs a decision. And neither one of those needs humiliation. So the next time someone you love does something that hurts you, before you say, "You're selfish, you don't care, you always do this, you never think about me," maybe ask yourself, what behavior am I actually trying to address? How did this impact me? What do I need? And am I trying to communicate or am I trying to punish? Because those can sound really similar when you're angry, but they cultivate completely different relationships. You cannot shame yourself into becoming a better person, and you cannot shame somebody else into becoming the person you think they should be. You can communicate, you can hold people accountable, you can set boundaries, you can acknowledge growth, you can decide when something isn't enough. But you cannot bully someone into emotional health. And if you have to make somebody hate themselves in order to get the behavior that you want, respectfully, fuck right off. Be so for real. That is not healthy. That's not respect. That's a problem. Be the kind of person you want caring for you emotionally and watch your relationships flourish. And hear me out. Doing this, being on this self-healing journey is really fucking hard at times. I'm here too. I am in the trenches with you guys, so I get it. The key to a better relationship is first looking at yourself and your own behaviors. And when you start doing this, you are going to get incredibly fucking uncomfortable. You're going to want to crawl right out of your skin. Showing your soft underbelly and setting your ego aside for the first time when you've only been operating in control and chaos for so long feels unbearable. But you have to do it. If you want vulnerability from your partner, you first need to learn to be vulnerable. You need to open up your chest and let them see the tangled mess. I'm a poet. You're welcome. And if you're going to sit there and tell me, well, I'm not going to do it unless they do, then I'm going to tell you to sit down and shut the fuck up and continue to be miserable because respectfully, you're just hammering home the fact that you are the problem. Change starts with you and only you. And it's gut wrenching when you start, but it's so worth it. And I say all of this with love, all of this with nothing but experience from my own life and my own healing journey. So, if you liked this episode, please like, comment, share. Just be careful when you share because you'll probably trigger the person that you sent it to. But I really appreciate you being here. Come see me again, and we'll walk on our shit together.